Are all whole grains okay to eat? Are there any exceptions? For example, some grains like wheat, barley, and oats have gluten, but quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, and wild rice have no gluten. Should we try to eat the grains with no gluten?
Fascinating question. And I've been in the plant-based nutrition game here for going on 40 years. And you watch various fads go by, the hypoglycemia and the candida, Lyme disease. Not that those aren't real conditions, but some people, the public really seizes on them. And so I watched the gluten wave go by. And though I must admit, as I was doing research for our master classes in plant-based nutrition, I was forced to look at the gluten issue. And I was surprised how many times in various diseases, from Crohn's disease and colitis, gluten plays a role. Psoriasis of the skin, gluten plays a role. Hypertension, asthma, and it did show up in honest to goodness medical studies, enough to make me say, there's something to this gluten thing. But I love gluten, and I have no problem. And the majority of people I know have no problem eating whole grain breads, etc., or that have whole wheat in them. So how do you make some sense out of this? First of all, and your question was well phrased, because the word grain, is a big broad brush there, but the question did make the delineation. The true grains are in the grass family: oats, wheat, corn, barley, rye. These are forms of grasses. And if you see the whole plant, you can see, yeah, that's my lawn grass, big, and the little seeds on your lawn grass, those are the wheat kernels or the barley kernels, etc. Those are, if they're in the grass family, they're going to have gluten in them. If you have the slightest suspicion that gluten is causing a problem, you eat a bunch of bread or pasta, and the next day either you've got abdominal distress or extra GI problems, skin rash, sore joints, running nose, sore eyes. If there's the slightest hint that it might be a gluten issue, well, you've got the ultimate and free lab test maneuver available to you. Stop eating it for a month or two. And if your symptoms magically go away, great. Then when you're feeling really good one day and you don't have much to do the next day, have 3 slices of whole wheat bread and do a challenge and see how you feel the next day. If you feel fine, then probably the gluten wasn't an issue. But if any of those symptoms come back, that's all you need to know. You're probably gluten sensitive. You probably want to walk around that. Now, that said, going back to our broad brush, people say grains, but there is, as your question stated, a bunch of non-glutinous grains. And in that family are quinoa, millet, amaranth, buckwheat. And these are small little grain-like, actually they're seeds and they're fruits. And if you look at their parent plant, they're clearly not grasses. Quinoa is a big leafy green bush. And most of these are green leafy plants. They're clearly not in the grass family, and they have no gluten. And so if there's any question, move on over to the non-glutinous grain-like foods. And so you can call them grains, but know that they're really not, because they're not in the grass family. And we become, especially as the arsenic and the rice thing has come up, we're eating less and less rice and more quinoa and millet and buckwheat. We just love them, throw them in the soup, throw them onto salads. And so to sum up, if there's any question about gluten, stop eating it for a month or 2 or 3, and then re-challenge yourself and see how you feel. And if you just don't feel good about eating true grains with gluten, then go to the non-glutinous grains, and you'll do fine. They're wonderful and very versatile, and we find all sorts of new ways to use them. So important question, but certainly nothing to make people veer away from a whole food plant-based diet.
Are animal products healthy to eat if they come from organic, grass-fed, free-range animals?
Oh my, that question about organic grass-fed. Animal muscle is animal muscle. And inherently, when you bite into the muscle of an animal, you're taking in saturated fat that promotes inflammation and damages the artery wall. You're taking in a big bite of protein that creates IGF-1 release and increases the aging process in the body. You're biting into the living, the recently living tissue of another mammal, usually. And so you're biting into, and not to freak out the listeners, but to being anatomically correct, as you bite into that chicken breast or that turkey leg or that burger, that you're biting into muscle and nerve and tendon and ligament and cartilage. Well, if you've got a leaky gut from alcohol or pesticides or antibiotics, some fragments of that animal tissue is going to be out in your bloodstream. Now you got the proteins of another animal's muscle, another animal's connective tissue floating out in your bloodstream. Well, might that not create antibodies that look for muscle and tendon to lock onto, and they may find it in your own body? So there's suspicion that it's this phenomenon that leads to these autoimmune diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. From eating somebody else's muscle and nerve tissue, you wind up producing antibodies against them. And so whether it was organic or not, whether it was grass-fed or not, animal muscle is animal muscle. And also, while we're talking about contaminants, all animals go through the slaughterhouse, even organic grass-fed ones, the cows and the pigs, etc., and they get shot in the head and killed. And they get hung up and they are eviscerated. The abdominal cavity is open and their intestinal tract is yarded out. And in that process, the contents of the gut of the pig or the cow or the chicken leaks all over, and along with their bacterial content. And if you take a culture tube and walk through any slaughterhouse and swab the cutting surface where they're all dismantling these animals, you can culture off salmonella, shigella, E. coli, clostridia, pseudomonas, all these rough, tough bacterial pathogens from the animal's gut. Why am I taking you down this road? Because that means that every chicken breast, every steak, every chop that leaves the slaughterhouse has a coating of these enteric, these gut bacteria from the animals on the surface. Well, it's wrapped up in clear plastic and sent to your supermarket, where under the ultraviolet light, these bacteria are killed, they die. That's the idea of the ultraviolet light. Well, when these bacteria die, their cell walls break apart and release this nasty lipopolysaccharide called endotoxin. Endotoxin is nasty stuff. Any doctor who spent time in the intensive care unit has seen people in endotoxic shock, and it kills you. It depresses the heart. It sets off histamine release and blood clotting and free radical formation. Endotoxin is nasty stuff, and it's heat stable. Cooking the burger, grilling the chicken breast, broiling the steak does not get rid of the endotoxin. So people are eating a meat-based diet, organic or not, are giving themselves a shot of endotoxin 3 times a day. And that causes problems. It makes gut leak, etc. Only animals make this sialic acid called nu-5GC, and that sets off inflammation throughout the body. And our paleo and keto friends are giving themselves a shot of nu-5GC 3 times a day. So all the way around, whether it's organic or not, eating animals is for mountain lions and ferrets, but it's not for us plant-eating hominids, organic or not. And we've got to stop kidding ourselves. And I've got a sign in my a slide in my slideshow. Welcome to camp. Stop kidding yourself. And that's what's required when it comes to organic grass-fed beef, etc. Yes, there's fewer pesticides, but that's the smallest part of it. And by the way, if you care about the environment, the grass-fed beef put out more greenhouse gases than the feedlot beef, because the feedlot animals are killed after 16 months. To raise a grass-fed animal to the size where it's worthwhile slaughtering them, it takes 3 years, 4 years. So that's 3 or 4 years, these animals are grazing, tearing up the prairie and breathing out more carbon dioxide, belching out more methane. They're an environmental disaster. So no matter how you look at it, organic, grass-fed anything is no bargain for the planet or for our health.